Marcus Bellamy signed the divorce papers with a hand that did not shake. His wife, Vivian, watched him across the long walnut table with a smile she did not bother to hide, a smile that carried 11 years of quiet triumph. She thought she was ending a marriage to a failure. She thought she was closing the final page on a man who had never amounted to anything. She did not know that within 40 minutes a helicopter would descend onto the manicured lawn of her father's estate, flattening the prize roses, and that the pilot would step out, remove his cap, and speak Marcus Bellamy's name with a reverence usually reserved for kings. Everything she believed about the quiet man in the gray sweater was about to collapse like a house built on sand. Before we go any further, if stories about patience, dignity, and the exact moment the truth finally lands mean something to you, take a second to like this video and subscribe so you never miss what comes next. And tell me in the comments where in the world you're watching from, because I genuinely want to know how far this story travels tonight. Now, let me take you back to the beginning, to how a man came to sit so calmly in a room full of people who were absolutely certain he had nothing. The dining room of the Ashford estate was built to intimidate, and it did its job well. Vivian's father, Gerald Ashford, had commissioned the house 30 years earlier, back when his construction firm was still clawing its way up the ladder, and every surface reflected the ambition of a man who measured love in square footage and respect in signatures. The ceiling soared, the windows stretched from floor to nearly the roof line. On this particular Sunday afternoon, the long walnut table had been set not for a meal, but for something closer to an execution. Vivian sat at one end, straight-backed, composed. Beside her, her lawyer, a sleek and polished man named Preston Vance, arranged documents in a neat, deliberate fan across the polished wood. And across from them sat Marcus, 41 years old, in a plain gray sweater that had seen better winters, holding a cup of coffee that had long ago gone cold in his hands. For 11 years, Marcus had been the Ashford family's favorite disappointment. He had married Vivian when she was 28, and he was 30. 11 years ago now, back when he ran a modest architecture consultancy out of a rented office above a neighborhood bakery, the business had never made him rich. Or so the family believed with total confidence. Over the years, they had watched him decline their generous invitations to expand, refuse their offers of investment, and quietly turn down the gleaming corner office that Gerald had once dangled in front of him like a treat before a dog. To the Ashfords, this was not principle. It was cowardice. A man who could have climbed the ladder and chose instead to stay at the bottom was, in their private vocabulary, a coward and a fool. They said it to each other over dinner. They said it, sometimes, within earshot of Marcus himself, and they watched to see if he would flinch. He never did. "You understand what you're signing," Preston said, sliding the final page across the table toward Marcus with 2 fingers. It was not really a question. It was a performance staged for Vivian's benefit, a small, theatrical flourish designed to underline how thoroughly this quiet man had been defeated. Marcus read every line, though he had read them twice already that morning. The settlement was almost insulting in the confidence of its terms. Vivian would keep the townhouse they had shared, the one her father had actually funded from the beginning. She would keep the vacation property up in the mountains, with its stone fireplace and its view of the valley. She would keep both of the vehicles in the garage. Marcus, for his part, would walk away with his personal accounts, his office equipment, and what the document called, in a phrase that made Vivian's mother lift a napkin to smother a laugh, any professional assets of demonstrable value. "They think you have none," said a voice inside Marcus, that he had learned long ago to keep silent. He did not correct a single person in that room. He simply picked up the pen, uncapped it slowly, and let the moment breathe. Vivian had rehearsed this scene in her mind for weeks. She had imagined he would beg, or at the very least argue, and she had carefully prepared herself to be gracious in the moment of her victory. But he only signed his name in even, unhurried strokes, set the pen down parallel to the edge of the page, and folded his hands. The smile she had worn all afternoon faltered for half a second, because a woman who has planned meticulously for tears is deeply unsettled by calm. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Marcus," she said, recovering her poise. "I really do. Someone who fits your lifestyle." Her lifestyle, she meant, was the one she was keeping. His was the one she was discarding, like an old coat. Now let me tell you what Vivian did not know, because the entire weight of this story rests on the enormous distance between what she believed and what was actually true. She believed Marcus was a man who had spent 11 years failing quietly and gracefully. In reality, Marcus had spent those same 11 years building something so vast, so deliberately hidden, that even his own wife had never once glimpsed its edges. It had started small, the way most true and lasting things do. When Marcus was 32, 2 years into the marriage, he had designed a low-cost, modular housing system, an elegant method for building sturdy, beautiful homes at a fraction of the usual price. He had patented the core method himself, sitting up at night at that worn drafting table above the bakery, and then he had done something unusual for a man surrounded by people who worshipped visible, glittering wealth. He had licensed the design quietly to developers across 3 countries, taking a small, steady percentage on every single unit built, and he had funneled every dollar of it into a holding company registered under a name no one in the Ashford family had any reason to recognize: Meridian Structural Holdings. He kept the consultancy above the bakery because he genuinely liked it. He liked the north light through the tall windows and the smell of bread rising up through the floorboards at dawn. He kept the gray sweaters because they were comfortable and honest, and he kept his mouth firmly shut because, early in his marriage, he had learned something that had broken his heart in slow motion. The Ashfords did not love people. They loved leverage. They loved advantage. And a man who reveals his fortune to people like that does not become a person to be cherished. He becomes a resource to be managed, a well to be drained. By the time these divorce papers had been drawn up, Meridian Structural Holdings owned licensing agreements on more than 200,000 built homes scattered across the globe, held a controlling stake in a regional airline that had once been Marcus's client, and commanded a portfolio of commercial real estate that included, through a long chain of subsidiaries no one had ever bothered to trace, the very office building where Preston Vance rented his prestigious law practice. The quiet man in the gray sweater, drinking cold coffee, was, by any honest accounting in the world, worth several $100 million. He had never spent it loudly, because spending it loudly was the whole disease he had married into. Now, you might reasonably ask why any man would hide such a thing from his own wife for 11 long years. The answer is the very reason this story matters. Marcus had not hidden it to trap her or to test her cruelly. He had hidden it because, in the second year of their marriage, he had told her the truth about one early success, a single deal worth several $100,000, and he had watched with dawning horror what she became. Within a week, she had told her father everything. Within a month, Gerald had arrived at that little office with a polished proposal to help manage Marcus's money, complete with paperwork that would have quietly handed the Ashford firm signing authority over his personal accounts. Marcus had declined, gently but firmly, and from that day forward, the entire family had treated him as a man who had foolishly squandered his one lucky break. He let them believe it. He let them believe it for 9 more years, right up to the day the papers were signed. And every single time Vivian introduced him at a party as my husband, the architect, with that little downward turn of her mouth that told everyone exactly how she felt about it, he had filed the moment quietly away, not out of a desire for vengeance, but out of a growing, sorrowful certainty that the woman he had married had never once, in all those years, actually seen the man she married. So when the papers were signed and Vivian said she hoped he would find someone who fit his lifestyle, Marcus simply nodded and said, "I think I already have the life I want. I just needed to stop pretending otherwise." Vivian did not understand the sentence. She frowned at it, filed it away as more of his quiet strangeness. She would understand it soon enough. Gerald Ashford chose exactly that moment to make his entrance, because men like Gerald never enter a room until the emotional labor has been done by others. He strode in wearing a golf shirt and the particular self-satisfaction of a father who believes he has successfully protected his precious daughter from a parasite. He clapped Marcus on the shoulder with a warmth so false it was almost artistic. "No hard feelings, son," he said, and the word son dripped with the contempt it had always carried in his mouth. "You gave it a good run. I'll grant you that. Not everyone's cut out for the big leagues. Nothing wrong with staying small. Somebody's got to. Nothing wrong with it at all." Marcus agreed easily. Gerald mistook the agreement for surrender, as he always mistook Marcus's calm for weakness. He poured himself a drink from the crystal decanters on the sideboard and settled into the chair at the head of the table as though he had personally won a war. "Tell you what, because I'm not a cruel man, whatever people say, I'll have my people help you find some office space. Something more your size, that building you're in now, the one above the bakery. I hear the whole block is being bought up. New owner, some faceless outfit. You'll probably get pushed right out by the end of the year." He chuckled into his glass. "Better to land somewhere soft, eh? Ask the man who knows." Marcus looked at him for a long, quiet moment. The whole block was indeed being bought up. Marcus knew this with perfect certainty, because Meridian Structural Holdings was the buyer, and the bakery below his office had already signed a 20-year lease at a rate specifically designed to keep them there forever, because Marcus loved the smell of bread in the mornings and had no intention of ever losing it. "That's very kind of you, Gerald," Marcus said. "I'll think about it." Preston Vance began gathering the signed papers into a leather folio, deeply satisfied with a job well done. Vivian's mother offered Marcus a cup of tea, the small mercy of a woman who simply wanted the discomfort in the room to be over. And Vivian, watching her ex-husband sit so serenely amid what should have been his total defeat, felt the first faint cold thread of unease begin to wind through her chest. She had fully expected the calm to crack. It hadn't. In all her years of experience, only two kinds of people stayed this calm in a moment like this: the truly broken and those who knew something you did not. Outside, faint at first, then rapidly unmistakable, came a sound. A low, rhythmic beating, growing steadily louder, pressing itself against the tall windows of the dining room until the very glass seemed to hum. Vivian's mother frowned and set down the teapot with a small clink. Gerald turned toward the sound with the irritation of a man who assumes that any interruption to his afternoon is a personal affront. The great chandelier above the table began to tremble, its crystals whispering against one another. Across the vast manicured lawn, descending against the pale afternoon sky, came a helicopter. Sleek, white, unmarked, except for a single logo painted on its tail, a clean and stylized letter M. It settled onto the grass with the effortless precision of something that had performed this exact maneuver 1,000 times before. The rotor wash, flattening the beds of roses that Gerald's gardener had won 3 regional awards for. "What in God's name?" Gerald sputtered, half rising from his chair, his drink forgotten. "Who is that? Whoever they are, they cannot simply land on my—" The cabin door slid open. A pilot in a crisp, immaculate uniform stepped down onto the grass, ducked beneath the slowing blades, and walked toward the house with an unhurried, confident purpose. He did not knock. He opened the tall glass garden doors as though he had every right in the world to do so, and he stood at the threshold of the dining room, cap held respectfully in his hands. His eyes swept the room. Past Gerald. Past Vivian. Past Gerald. Past the lawyer and the mother and the crystal drinks and the neatly folded papers, and landed, finally, on the quiet man in the gray sweater. "Mr. Bellamy," the pilot said, "I'm very sorry to interrupt, sir. The boards assembled early. The Sterling acquisition closed this morning, well ahead of schedule, and they'd like your signature before the markets in Singapore open. I have the documents on board, ready for you. And, Mr. Bohr, Ashford's flight is fueled and standing by whenever you're ready to depart. The room went utterly silent. It was the kind of silence that carries weight, that presses on the eardrums, the way water pressure builds when you descend into the deep. Vivian's smile was gone. It had not faded gradually. It had vanished all at once, the way a light goes out when the switch is thrown. Mr. Ashford's flight, Gerald said, because his own name had reached his ears and short-circuited every other part of the sentence. What are you talking about? What board? Who on earth are you? The pilot glanced at Marcus, uncertain whether he had permission to answer. Marcus gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, granting it. Meridian Structural Holdings, sir, the pilot said. Mr. Bellamy is the founder and majority shareholder. I've had the honor of flying him for 4 years now. The name meant nothing to Gerald in the first startled second. Then slowly, terribly, it began to mean everything. Meridian. He knew that name. He had spent the last 18 months trying and failing to negotiate with Meridian, because Meridian had quietly and methodically acquired the entire commercial district his own firm depended on, and Meridian had, just 3 weeks ago, declined to renew the lease on the Ashford construction headquarters, a decision that had thrown Gerald's entire company into a desperate, silent scramble he had not breathed a word of to his family. Gerald had always assumed Meridian was a faceless conglomerate, a committee, somewhere, a wall of anonymous lawyers. He had never once imagined that it wore a gray sweater and sat at his own dining table, drinking cold coffee. That's not possible, Vivian whispered, the words barely audible. Marcus rose. He did not rise dramatically. He rose the way a man rises when a conversation has simply reached its natural end. He set his cold coffee cup down on its saucer, and for the first time all afternoon he looked directly into Vivian's eyes, and there was no cruelty in his face at all. There was only a deep, settled sadness that was somehow far worse than any anger could ever have been. You asked what I do now, he said quietly. I'll do what I've been doing for 11 years. I'll keep building things. I just won't have to hide it anymore. Preston Vance had gone the color of old paper. His hands, still clutching the leather folio of signed divorce papers, had begun to tremble visibly because a thought had occurred to him that had not yet reached the others in the room. His law firm rented its prestigious offices in a gleaming tower on Meridian Row. And the phrase buried in the settlement, professional assets of demonstrable value, the phrase that everyone at this table had quietly laughed at, was about to become the most expensive joke of his entire career. The building, Preston said faintly, to no one in particular. My firm's building. Meridian's, Marcus confirmed, and not unkindly. But don't worry, Preston. I don't punish people for simply doing their jobs. You represented your client to the best of your ability. That's exactly what you're paid for. Gerald finally found his voice, and it came out strangled and thin. You had money this entire time. You had all of this, and you let us. You let Vivian. Why? Why in the world would you pretend to be nothing? And here at last, Marcus said the thing he had waited 11 long years to say. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The quiet of it was what made it land. Because the first time I told the truth about what I had, Marcus said, your daughter didn't look at me any differently. She looked at me like an account she'd just gained access to. Within a week, she'd told you everything. Within a month, you were standing in my office with papers to control my money, not to celebrate what I'd built, to manage it, to manage me. That's the moment I finally understood something true about this family. You don't love people. You appraise them. He paused, letting the words settle over the table like dust. So I let you appraise me at 0, and I found out exactly what my marriage was worth. To a woman who believed I had nothing to offer but myself. The words landed on Vivian like a physical blow, because she knew in the deepest and most unwelcome chamber of her heart that every one of them was true. She had not stayed for love. She had stayed out of habit and comfort and stability, and she had left the very moment she believed there was nothing further to gain. And now she understood that the man she had discarded had been watching all along, not with hatred, but with the terrible, patient calm of someone waiting only to have his oldest suspicion confirmed. "You could have told me," she said, and even to her own ears it sounded like an accusation with no ground beneath it to stand on. "I did tell you," Marcus said simply, "once, and you taught me never to do it again." He turned to the pilot. "Give me 2 minutes." Then he walked to the head of the table where Gerald still stood clutching his drink like a life raft, and he did something no one in the room expected. He extended his hand. "Your company's in serious trouble," Marcus said. "I know this, because Meridian is the reason for it. The lease I declined to renew wasn't personal, whatever you told yourself. Your firm's been over-leveraged for 3 years running. Gerald, you've been building your image far faster than your balance sheet could ever support. I've watched you drown men who couldn't repay you fast enough, and I've watched you smile while you did it. I never forgot a single one." Gerald's jaw worked, but no sound came out of it. "I'm not going to do to you what you've done to all of them," Marcus continued, his voice steady. "That's the difference between us. And honestly, it's the only revenge I want. Meridian will renew your lease at a fair rate. Your 200 employees will keep their jobs because they never did a single thing to me. And you'll wake up every morning for the rest of your life, knowing that the man you called a coward could have ended you with one phone call and chose not to." He lowered his unshaken hand, since Gerald had not taken it. "Sleep with that, Gerald." The days that followed rearranged the entire Ashford family like furniture after a flood has come through the house. Dew travels fast in the world of people who measure everything, and within a single week, the entire glittering circle knew that Vivian Ashford had divorced a man worth several $100 million, while genuinely believing him to be broke. The party invitations, once a steady river flowing to her door, slowed to a bare trickle and then stopped altogether. The friends who had laughed so warmly at her clever little jokes about her unambitious husband now avoided meeting her eyes at every gathering, because there is nothing a status-hungry crowd fears more than being caught on the wrong side of a person who turned out to matter after all. Gerald, for his part, discovered that mercy from an enemy is its own peculiar kind of prison. Every single renewed lease payment to Meridian was a fresh reminder of that Sunday afternoon. Every board meeting where the name Meridian came up was a small, private flogging he was forced to endure with a straight face and a steady hand. He had spent his entire life believing that true strength meant the raw power to destroy the people beneath you. Marcus had shown him a strength he could not even comprehend, the power to destroy and then to deliberately decline, and it haunted him far more thoroughly than his own ruin ever could have. But the story broke open most completely, in the end, was Vivian herself. For weeks, she told herself, over and over, that she had made a perfectly reasonable decision with the information she had at the time. She had not known. How could anyone possibly blame her for what she could not have known? But at night, in the dark, the sentence came back to her again and again in Marcus's quiet, unbearable voice. "You don't love people, you appraise them." She tried with all her strength to reject it. She could not, because when she was honest with herself, brutally and completely honest in the way that only ever comes at 3 o'clock in the morning, she remembered the early years. She remembered how Marcus would come home from that office above the bakery, smelling of fresh bread and pencil lead and pure excitement about some small, elegant solution he'd found for a client that day. And she remembered how she had listened to him with only half an ear, waiting patiently for the part of the story where the money finally got bigger. She had never once asked to see his drawings. She had never once cared what he actually built. She had cared only about what it might one distant day be worth. She had been married to a genuinely extraordinary man, and she had spent 11 years quietly annoyed that he wasn't a richer one. About 2 months after the helicopter descended onto her father's ruined lawn, Vivian did something she had never once done in all their years together. She went to the office above the bakery. She half expected to find it gone, cleared out, absorbed into some faceless corporate restructuring. Instead, she found it exactly as it had always been, unchanged by any of it, the worn drafting table. The good, clear north light spilling across the floor, the warm smell of bread rising up through the boards from below, and Marcus, in a gray sweater, bent over a set of plans for a housing development in a country she had never even bothered to learn he worked in. He looked up when the little bell over the door rang. He did not seem the least bit surprised to see her standing there. He set down his pencil and waited. "I'm not here for anything," she said quickly, because she needed him to know that at least once in her entire life she had walked toward him wanting absolutely nothing from him. "I know that probably doesn't mean much, coming from me. Of all people, I needed to see it. The place where you did all of it. The place I never came to, not even once." Marcus studied her for a long moment in the quiet. There was no triumph in his face. There never had been in any of it. That was the part she finally understood, standing there in the doorway of a room she had never entered in 11 full years of marriage. He had not been keeping his secret in order to win anything. He had been protecting the only thing he truly valued in the world, which was the work itself, and the small, honest, bread-scented life it allowed him to live, from a family that would have swallowed it whole without a second thought. "It's a good room," he said simply. "It is," she agreed softly. And then, because she owed him at the very least one true and unguarded sentence before she left his life for good, she said, "I'm sorry. Not because of the money. I want you to understand that. Because I never once asked what you were making up here. In all those years, I never once asked to see what you drew. I think that's the thing I'll carry with me, the thing I'll be ashamed of for the rest of my life." Marcus was quiet for a long time. Then he stood, and he walked over to a wide flat cabinet in the corner of the room, and he pulled open one of the shallow drawers, and he lifted out a single sheet of paper, its edges yellowed and soft with age. He carried it across the room and laid it gently on the drafting table, directly under the clear north light. It was a drawing of a house. Modest, warm, human, with a wide picture window facing out onto a garden and a small studio wing tucked off the back. In the corner, written in his precise and careful architect's hand, was a date from 11 years earlier and a title. "Home for V. I designed this the year we married," Marcus said, looking down at it. "It's the house I was going to build for us, once the licensing income was steady enough to be sure. I never showed it to you, because by then I already knew, deep down, that you'd ask me what it was worth instead of who it was for." He kept his eyes on the drawing, not on her. "I kept it all these years because it reminded me of the man I used to be, back when I still believed you might one day see me. I don't need it anymore." He slid the drawing slowly across the smooth surface of the table toward her. Vivian looked down at the house that had been meant for her, the house of a love she had appraised and coldly discarded, and she understood at last the full and terrible shape of what she had lost. Not a fortune. Differ. Fortunes could be rebuilt from nothing, given time and will. She had lost the one man in the world who had ever wanted to build something for her rather than out of her, and she had traded him away for a settlement she had genuinely thought was clever. She did not take the drawing. She could not bring herself to. It was not hers, and in truth, it never really had been, because you cannot own something you were never once willing to see. "Thank you," she whispered, "for showing me who I was." She left the office above the bakery that afternoon, and she did not come back. In time, she rebuilt a smaller, quieter, less glittering life for herself. And those who knew her in the years afterward said that she had genuinely changed, that she listened now in a way she never had before, that she asked people what they made with their hands and their hours, and truly cared about the answer they gave. Whether that was real redemption or only regret wearing redemption's borrowed clothes, no one could say for certain. But it was, at the very least, movement in the right direction, and that is more than a great many people ever manage in a whole lifetime. Marcus, for his part, kept right on building. He never once flaunted the fortune the world now knew he had commanded all along. He kept the office above the bakery. He kept the gray sweaters. Years later, when a young journalist finally asked him why a man of his considerable means chose to live so simply, he thought of a helicopter resting on a lawn full of ruined award-winning roses and a wife who had smiled while she signed him away. He gave an answer the journalist never fully understood. "Because the day I stopped needing anyone to be impressed by me," he said, "was the day I finally became free. Money can buy almost anything a person could want, but it can't buy back the years you spend performing for people who were only ever quietly counting the contents of your pockets." So let me leave you tonight with the question that sits underneath all of this, the one I've been turning over and over in my own mind since the very first time I heard this story. We spend so much of our short lives being measured by other people, and worse, so much of it measuring ourselves by their crooked yardstick. But what if the people appraising you have no earthly idea what you're actually worth? And what if the truest strength of all isn't the raw power to prove them wrong, but the quiet peace of no longer needing to? Marcus Bellamy could have destroyed every single person seated at that table. He chose instead to build. That is the part I truly hope stays with you long after this story ends. If this story moved you tonight, do me a favor and let me know in the comments about a time when someone underestimated you and what you did about it, because I read every single one of them. Hit that like button so more people can find their way to this story, and subscribe if you want to be right here for the next one. I've got a story coming that I honestly believe will hit even harder than this one did. Until then, remember this and carry it with you. Your worth was never theirs to decide.